what? I've met some guys around here in shul and stuff, like I'm into construction stuff. So construction arbitrator and adjudicator in Ontario. And you can't believe how much construction is going on in Israel. And there'll be more even later. So I'm exploring now, maybe seeing who does building, development problems, stuff like that. So maybe there's a connection I can make over time, and see if we can do the same thing here. Whatever.
Amazing.
Yeah, we'll see.
That'll be great.
Yeah.
Okay, so why don't we get started? The siman begins with the following question: Al mi mutelet petichat stima bebayit sachur? Upon whom is the responsibility to unclog a block, I guess in a pipe, in a rented house? Sorry, there we go. Okay, so sacharti dira l'shana. I rented an apartment for a year. Ve'acharei chatzi shana ira'a stima b'ma'arechet habiyub. So he says after a half a year, some kind of blockage took place in the pipe, somewhere along the piping. V'hutzru lahachlif tzinor machmat shehit yashen. And they had to replace a tzinor, which is, I think, the faucet, because it became old. Al mi chovat hatashlum, al hamaskir or al hasocher. Okay, so who has to pay for the replacement of these items? Very similar to what we've seen before. Is it the responsibility of the landlord, or is it the responsibility of the tenant? So that's, again, this is landlord-tenant relations. And so, yeah. So who has to replace the pipe? So the biyub is also a pipe, but I think it refers to a larger pipe. I'm not sure. The sewer pipe. In other words, the biyub is the sewerage. So they had to replace a pipe because it had gotten old. So who has to pay for that? Is it the landlord or the tenant? Based on everything that we've seen, what would we say? Say landlord, okay. That's certainly what, yeah, right. And it's something that is necessary for the apartment to be habitable, right? Okay, so fine. So Maran Kosav b'Shulchan Aruch hamaskir bayit lachavero chayv lahamid lo dlatot liftoch lo achalanot shenit kalkalu. That the Shulchan Aruch paskins in Siman Shin Yud Daled, that if you rent out a house to your friend, you as the landlord have an obligation to set up doors, make sure that the windows are opened if they become messed up or in some way. Now, what we're talking about is, let's say a window collapses. A lot of these structures were not that sturdy. So if the window caves in, you have to reopen it. That's what they're talking about. Velasot lo man'ul ladelet, you have to make a lock for the door. V'chol kayotze bazeh b'dvarim shehem maseh uman. These are all require professional tradespeople. V'heim ikar gadol b'yeshivas habatim v'hachatzeros. And they are an absolute necessity in setting up homes in metropolitan or urban areas. Ubizman hazeh, al hamaskir letaken delatot chalonot va'aronot mitbach. Nowadays, what that translates into is not just doors and windows. It translates into aronot, closets, in cabinets of the kitchen cabinets, kedei shahadira tia re'ui lamagurim, so that the apartment is habitable. The cost of haramasham, shahachiyuv al hamaskir hu afilu imra hasocher lifnei shesocher et hadira shedevarim elu mikulkalim v'lo amar klum. So the Ramah writes that this is true even if the tenant comes to see the apartment before signing the lease and takes note of the fact that there are some things that are not working correctly. Ein ze nikra mechila. That's not called being moichel. That's not called saying, well, you saw it, so you knew what you were getting. No, you can't make that argument. Ve'al hamaskir l'taken et hadvarim habasisim halalu. And the landlord, therefore, has an obligation to repair these basic amenities. V'lachein, hotzaot b'rechush hamishutaf, kegon zifut hagag, and therefore, any expenditures for shared responsibilities in the apartment building, such as tarring the roof, the siyud cheder hamadregot, and painting the stairwell, the chen tikun ha boiler. Okay, fixing the boiler. Okay, wow, that's a nice Hebrew word. I don't know which book of Tanakh the word boiler appears in, but anyway, fixing the boiler, hadud shemesh, the solar heater, hachlafat sinorot, changing pipes, tikun b'ma'arechet ha'hasaka, fixing any kind of heating system, v'chenim bo achbarim ledira shelo machmat hasocher, or if, remember we talked about pests, and if rodents come into the house that are not the fault of the tenant. In other words, if the tenant is what do you call those people? Hoarders, and they leave food all over the place, and that's how the place gets filled with mice, that's one thing. But if the tenant has been keeping a clean apartment and mice get into the apartment, kol elu chalim al hamaskir l'shalem otam. These are all the responsibility of the landlord to take care of. Aval hatzotzaot shutafot kegon. But he says, but other communal or homeowner responsibilities for the apartment building, such as nikayon, cleaning the common areas, mayim chashmal, water and electricity, kolel hachlafat norot hachashmal, including changing light bulbs, tachzuka hashotefet shel hama'alit, so any joint projects that involve let's see, the elevator. Let's see, I'm not sure how to translate tachzuka, maybe reinforcement, maybe tachzuka, maintenance, hashotefet, routine maintenance. That's what the words tachzuka hashotefet shel hamalit, routine maintenance of the elevator, ginun, taking care of the gardening, uchidoime, and the like, chalot al hasocher. That's the responsibility of the tenant. Whereas if it's a routine thing, the elevator, yeah.
Yeah. How would that be allocated to which tenant?
Well, I guess they charge each tenant. They probably say each tenant we need to make a.
It's like a condo.
Yeah, it's yeah, right.
Right, and they've used that for the condo.
Yeah,
it's like condo fees.
Yeah.
So the tenant has to pay the condo fees for regular maintenance issues, but for any repair issues, like we saw in the previous tshuva, the landlord has to pay for. So which is quite interesting, he's making a distinction between roof maintenance and elevator maintenance. For roof maintenance, I suppose it's not as common that you have to tar the roof. It's probably done once every 10 years. Elevator maintenance is probably done once a year or maybe twice a year. And so that's something that is, since it's much more prevalent over the course of several months, so that's why it's the tenant's responsibility. Ulam, however, im ira stima, if let's say a clog appears in the drain, and all you have to do is unclog the drain, pashut shehachova al hasocher. That's the tenant's responsibility, ki hastima naba'a machmat shimusho, because invariably the sink got clogged. In most situations, the sink got clogged because of the usage of the tenant. You'd say you got too much hair down the drain or whatever it was. But if it was more than just unclogging a clog, if it was because there were old pipes that needed to be replaced, Tashlum hachelek uschar ha'avoda shel hachlafat hachelek yachulu ala maskir. That portion of the bill is the landlord's responsibility. Keven shahashka'azu no'ada l'shabeach et neches hamaskir. He says because that kind of investment is to the benefit of the landlord, because this is considered home improvement. That's not just considered home repair. That's home improvement. But tashlum chelek ptichat hastima ala socher l'shalem, and just the fee for the unclogging is going to go to the tenant. In other words, the tenant says, okay, it's true. I maybe put too much paper in the toilet and it got clogged. And I couldn't unclog it myself, so I had to hire a guy. But in the course of unclogging the pipe, the plumber discovers, hey man, you've got a really, really corroded pipe. I'm not sure how they discovered that, but maybe it was like a sewage, the sewage line got clogged up. So the tenant has to pay for the unclogging of the sewage line. But in the course of unclogging it, they discovered that this pipe is really corroded and it's leaking and it's going to go. So then that's the landlord's responsibility. He says, but now that's all when there's just a regular tenant-landlord agreement where nothing has been itemized and specified in the rental agreement. Aval im hamaskir hitna im hasocher, o hasocher hitna im hamaskir. But if either the landlord or the tenant put in specific conditions, shekol ha'hotzaot yachulu al achad hatzdadim, that all expenses should fall upon one of the parties, kol tanai shebemamon tano kayem v'yasu lefi ha'haskem, then that's a binding condition or stipulation, and therefore they have to obey the rental agreement. So, which is again why it makes sense that whenever you enter into a rental agreement, you should make sure that you specify as much as possible, so that you don't get into these issues of who is responsible to pay for the corroded pipe. It could be that the landlord says, "Listen, I'm giving you a discount on this rent because I'm living in a different country, and I don't want to be bothered by anything." Right? In other words, so if anything breaks down in this apartment, I'm letting you live here for 5 years. I don't want to ever have to be called. I just want to know that I've gotten a direct deposit every month into my account. Anything breaks, you fix it, and we're in agreement. Yeah. So.
We'll send you a note exactly what did break.
Yeah.
And then you often will have to be involved in payment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. But
Okay. Because they're taking care of it, you're $7,000 per month.
That's right. That's right. I mean, the other option is like, let's say the tenant says, I'm paying you a premium on this apartment. I don't want to have to deal with broken appliances. I don't want to have to deal with anything. I'll pay you an extra $1,000 a month to make sure that I get premium service. I don't care whether it's a burst pipe or this or that. I just want there to be a maintenance guy who's going to come in every week and make sure that everything's working. And I don't want to be bothered with anything, and I'll pay you more. So either possibility is true, but it has to be specified in the rental agreement. Uvemida v'hamasker lo meshalem et chiyuvo, rashai hasocher lohorid lo et zeh midemei haschirus. And in any situation where the landlord does not fulfill his financial obligation, the tenant has a right to deduct it from the monthly rent, and basically say, I'm not paying you for this month and next month because of the cost that I incurred to have to pay for replacing the sewage line, the sewer line, which I don't know how much that costs, but it's probably not cheap. Okay. Okay, but in any event, this is just another example of how important it is to have everything specified in writing when you enter into a landlord-tenant relationship. Okay. All right, another similar shaila is the next shaila. Tashlum nizilat mayim al hamaskir o hasocher. Paying for a leaky faucet. Who's responsible? The tenant or the landlord? Leaky faucet, what do you guys say?
Depends where it is. Depends where it is. It's just a faucet.
Okay, so we have a machlokus in the room. All right. Some say landlord, some say tenant. What's the argument to say that it should be the landlord, Errol?
It's a mixture in the.
Because it's a necessary fixture in the house. What's the argument to say that it's a tenant, Joby?
I would say misuse, overuse of it.
Yeah, wear and tear,
Just regular wear and tear.
It's just the faucet part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Depends on the type of faucet.
That's what we do then.
You have kids around.
Judge Huberman, what do you rule?
You get a brand new.
The tenant is not responsible in Ontario for normal wear and tear. So it would be on the landlord to fix it as part of the repair and maintenance obligation, unless the problem was caused by the damage by the tenant. The tenant was negligent, then it's on the tenant, but otherwise not.
I also think we have to make a distinction between commercial and residential.
Ron wants to distinguish between commercial and residential. What's the
Right,
distinction?
so residential for sure is what I just said. Commercial depends on the lease.
It depends on the lease. So you would certainly probably want to put in writing in any tenancy agreement, who's responsible for what. But what did we say before? Regular maintenance of things that just normally break down over the course of time. So we said that in the previous tshuva, the boiler, right, has to be paid for by the landlord. The water heater, the heater has to be paid for by the landlord. Something that is a necessary amenity for habitation has to be paid by the landlord. However, something like a leaky faucet, it's a little bit iffy because it breaks down regularly. It's expected. It's not a regular type of maintenance issue. But can you say that a person overworks the faucet? Like, you have an aggressive faucet user versus a.
Because out of the faucet.
I think the two issues, because it could be that the whole faucet needs to be replaced or replace the washers. It's just not the leaking.
Sometimes it's just you have to replace the washers. Sometimes you have to replace the whole mechanism inside.
But also it's part of decoration too. You can have the faucet that nowadays not just a faucet, it's color, style.
It's decorative,
matches the
yeah.
whole thing with the batch
Yeah.
water. So it's
Yeah. So, okay, it's definitely a fixture, but you don't necessarily have to change the whole fixture if it's the leaky faucet. You just change the internal mechanism, which is not visible.
I think it's like the light fixture. You're responsible to change the bulb, not to change.
Right. Errol says it's like changing the light bulbs, Okay, so where are we going to go with this, fellas? Let's take a look. Okay, so here's the shaila. Okay, sacharti dira bischar chodshi. I rented an apartment on a monthly rental basis. V'hitchayavti l'shalem et tashlumei hamayim, and I am liable to pay for the regular water bill. Aval b'chodesh ha'acharon hayta nizila be'echat hatzinorot shelo ba'ashmati. This last month, there was a leak in one of the faucets that had nothing to do with me. In other words, just regular, just showed up one day. Umechir hamayim higia yoter mikaful, and the water bill was over double because of that leak. You know where this also happens? With the flapper in the toilet. A lot of times it's just an old flapper, just wear and tear. And then you get your water bill because the toilet's been running, and sometimes you don't even notice it. And then you realize, oh my gosh, like what's going on here? So a $10 flapper can sometimes cost you a couple $100. Al mi l'shalem et hamayim, alai or al hamaskir. So who has to pay the water bill? So he's even asking more than that. He's asking not only who has to pay for the repair of the sink, but who has to pay for the extra water the water bill that I incurred. Okay, so Rav Sharaga writes as follows: Pashut hadavar she'im moneh hamayim hu avar bi'iriya al shem hasocher. He says if the water meter, okay, is in the name of the tenant. In other words, when the iriyah, when the utility company, when they send out a bill, they send out a bill to in the name of the tenant. Okay, al hasocher l'shalem et kol hatashlumin. Then the renter the tenant has to pay for all utilities that his name is on the bill. Ki yesh lo chozeh im ha'iriyah. Because he has a personal contract with the utility company. Okay, v'chol hadin udvarim hu bein hasocher li'iriyah. So it's an exclusive contract between the tenant and the utility company. Bahamaskir lotzad b'inyan umazalo garam, and the landlord has no involvement whatsoever in that contract for water supply between the iriyah, am I translating iriyah correct? I'm just calling it the utility company, but it's the municipality really. That's really how you translate it. And it's bad mazel that you didn't notice the leak, and too bad. Okay, aval yesh ladun, but here's where the issue can really come in. Kishemoneh hamayim rashum al shem hamaskir. He says, what happens if the water meter is listed by the utility company in the name of the landlord? Okay. The mitzad echad yesh lomar dekevin sherashum al shem hamaskir. He says, on the one hand, you could argue that since it's now in other words, there's a contract between the landlord and the municipality, hadinu dvarim hu bein ha'iriyah lamaskir. So therefore, they're the tenant can say, I'm just paying it on your behalf, but you're ultimately the responsible party. V'hu omed neged hatvia shel ha'iriyah. And he's the one who has to stand against the water company's claim. And maybe you could argue that the tenant only has to pay for the water that he used, not for the water that leaked out that he never ended up using. Right? In other words, the tenant has a good claim. He says, yes, I promised you in the rental agreement that I would pay for the water that I use. Right? And so even though the bill comes in the landlord's name, which is, I guess, quite common. Does it happen here also in Ontario?
It has to be because it's part of the water it has the same name as the owner of the house. You cannot separate it.
Oh,
In my business, I get my own water bill, and my landlord, I'm a part of a building, and he gets a separate part for his. So
It's commercial.
it's commercial.
so maybe there's a difference between commercial and residential. Have any of you ever rented an apartment or a house here? Did you ever rent a house here? Or have you rented out a house here? Or an apartment? I'm just curious in Ontario, how does it normally work? Marv, you have any idea?
Yeah, normally on a residence, they have one water meter. But in commercial buildings, they do meter off tenants have different meters for water, and they get charged per usage as per the meter reading.
Okay, now I decide I'm going to downsize and I'm going to buy myself an apartment, a condo, and I'm going to rent out my house. So when I rent out my house, does the bill still come in my name or does it come in the tenant's name in Ontario?
It would come in the owner's name, and then there'd be an agreement for the tenant to pay whatever use they make of it, their share or whatever.
Okay, so we're basically dealing with that case, and that's the second alternative that Rav Sharaga is dealing with. So if in a case of a leak where the tenant gets a a double the normal water bill because of that leak, who's responsible for that extra amount? On the one hand, you could say that the tenant says, I only want to pay for the water that I use, not for the water that leaked out. But umitzad sheni yesh lomer shasocher chayiv l'shalom et kol hatashlum. He says, on the other hand, there's another, the counter argument to that is that the tenant should be responsible. Keven de kesha adam socher dira, hu mitchayev b'chol ha'yitchayevuyot shebadira. Because when a person rents an apartment, he's agreeing to pay for all of the normal expenditures and the costs that are involved in that rental. And therefore, he should pay for whatever the meter says was used in that apartment. And therefore, maybe the tenant should pay for the entire water bill, including the water that leaked out. So, and it seems like, okay. So first of all, let's just before we go into the answer. All right, let's take a look at the answer. I don't know if we may have to finish this tomorrow. Oh, by the way, I'm out of town tomorrow. I'm just running quickly to a wedding this morning, and I'll be overnight in New York, and I'm back tomorrow morning. But I will miss the class tomorrow. So our next class will be Bezrat Hashem on Friday. So my apologies. I'll put that in the WhatsApp. V'lachein eitzat tova lamaskir, and therefore the best advice that we can give, since there's really two ways to look at this, shebisha shemaskir et dirato ya'avir et kol hacheshbonot al shem hasocher, and therefore the best way to do this, and Marv, you'll have to tell us if this is even doable in Ontario, is put the water bill and the electric bill in the name of the tenant. V'lo yihilo dinu dvarim im ha'iriyah klal. And therefore, that way you won't be a party of interest to the municipality or to the utility company. That will avoid any shaila. That will avoid any ambiguity in the law. Okay. Now, Marv, when you rent your house out, can you change the water meter in the name of the tenant?
I think the utility company would require proof of ownership. So if you sell your house, you have to make sure that the new owner is transferred over to the new owner. I don't believe that the utility company will change it to a tenant.
I think hydro can do it and gas, but not water.
Hydro is electric.
Oh, maybe hydro, yes.
Hydro and gas, you can do it, with water no, because it's part of the municipality, and they go by the number, not even your house number. They have like a descriptive. If you see your tax bill,
Yeah.
it's a big number.
Lot number.
That's the lot number and the dimensions and everything. So the water is part of that.
So Marv, you hear that? Mordechai is saying there's a difference between water on the one hand and hydro and gas on the other hand.
Yeah, that could be. I know for sure that water, I don't think they allow water to be transferred to a tenant. The other, it could be, yeah.
And also water is connected to drainage, because if you check your bill, 50% is your water use and 50% is how much you drain. So basically it's connected. So you pay half and half mostly. Because a few years ago I have a leak in my pool.
Water versus
But water and drainage.
like
So
sewage?
You pay the sewage, you pay for that too. So I have a
Right.
leak in my pool a couple of years ago and I got a bill of a couple $1,000. So I fight it. I say, okay, I use the water, but I don't want to pay for sewer because I didn't use it. So eventually the water is going to get into our sewer system, so you have to pay for it. So I have to pay no matter what. I know. But eventually it's gonna reach, it's gonna go to the underground, it's gonna reach to.
So they wouldn't give you a break, eh?
No, I have to pay. So it's 50-50 basically. You pay, I don't know, $1, 50 cents for water, 50 cents for use, and it's connected to the house. So I'm sure that you cannot, that's the only service you cannot change. Hydro you can do it, and gas, but not the water.
Okay, now what would be an example? I guess there could be a gas leak in theory.
But
And-
that's
and-
never,
Yeah, right.
From your barbecue.
Yeah, let's say it's from the barbecue.
Natural gas, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I have. Yeah. Well, so far, Baruch Hashem,
No leaks.
Liayin Hara, yeah. You would also smell it, I think. Okay, so so first of all, he says hasvara baza, the svara to require the tenant to pay for the leak is there's two reasons to obligate the tenant. Number one, since he's the primary user of the water, he has to pay for it. And secondly, he says the bill comes in his name. So so there's no argument to hold the landlord liable when the bill comes in the name of the tenant. So apparently in Israel, you can transfer the water use to the tenant, maybe because it's apartment buildings and it's expected. Like, in other words, just because a guy owns an apartment building, that's, I guess, commercial use, right? Because everyone has their own separate meter. So, okay, so that's probably more likely to occur in an apartment kind of setting, not in a house setting. Okay, we'll have to hold it here for today. We'll see you Bezrat Hashem on Friday, and maybe we'll just finish off this tshuva, okay? All right, take care, everybody.